You want to know the exact moment I stopped believing what they taught us about humans? It wasn't a battle, it wasn't blood. It was a girl standing in a room full of the finest cadets in the galaxy, all of them face down on the floor, and she was rubbing her nose like she'd walked past a garbage vent. That was it, that was the moment. Let me back up. My name is Kesh Ordanu. I was a sub-instructor at the Threng Combat Academy for 11 years. I supervised airless nerve drills, endurance blocks, and Class 5 conditioning. If you don't know what any of that means, don't worry. You will. And by the time I'm done, you'll understand why I still can't smell a certain cleaning agent without my hands starting to shake. The academy sat on a rock we called Threng, though the rock had another name once, before the Valen cored it out and built inside it. It hung between 3 suns, and all 3 of them were angry ones, old, red, swollen things that never fully set. So the light never really went away. It just changed color. Morning was the color of dried blood. Evening was the color of an old bruise. That light does something to you after a few years. You stop trusting your own eyes. You start relying on the schedule instead. The schedule was the only thing on Threng that never lied. We trained cadets from 41 member species, the proud ones, the strong ones, the Dralen with their armored plating, the Ossic who could go 9 days without water, the Vint who had 2 hearts and could run until one of them stopped and keep running on the other. These weren't recruits. Understand that. Nobody arrived at Threng by accident. Every single cadet in the building had already survived a home selection so brutal that entire generations of their species watched it like a holy event. By the time they reached us, they were the best their worlds had ever produced. And our whole job was to break them a little more. Not to hurt them, never that, to find the edge, to push each of them right up to the line where the body says no more, and then teach them to stand there without falling over. A soldier who has never met their own limit will meet it in the field at the worst possible time in front of people who depend on them. So we introduced them to it early, in a controlled room, under supervision. That was the philosophy anyway. That's what I believed for 11 years. Class 5 was where we did it. Class 5 was the airless nerve block. It's hard to explain to someone who's never been in one. Imagine a long chamber, low ceiling, matte gray walls that eat the light so nothing reflects and nothing distracts you. No windows. One door in, one door out, both sealed. Along the ceiling ran the emitter lines, thin silver channels, easy to miss if you didn't know to look. That's where the gas came from. We called it Sopper 9. The cadets called it worse things. It's a nerve suppressant. Not a poison, we weren't monsters, but a very precise chemical designed to shut down voluntary muscle control while leaving the cadet fully conscious. That's the cruel genius of it. You don't pass out. You feel every second of your own body refusing you. Your legs stop answering. Your arms go heavy. Your jaw won't close right. And your mind stays sharp the whole time, watching it happen, screaming at limbs that have quietly resigned. The point of the drill wasn't to see who could resist. Nobody resisted Sopper 9. That was impossible. The point was to see who kept their composure while it happened, who breathed steady, who didn't panic. A cadet who went down clean, controlled, no thrashing, that cadet passed. A cadet who screamed and clawed at the walls failed, and we pulled them for reassignment. 62 cadets in that particular cohort, Class 5, Block Theta, the elite of the elite, handpicked from the top 10% of the top 10%. And one human. I remember the paperwork on her, because it made the whole instructor wing laugh. Her name was Sabine Tor. She came from a colony world in the outer drift called Halgest. Now you have to understand what Halgest meant to us. In Valen, we didn't even have a proper word for that kind of world. We used a borrowed one, a rough one. It translated to something like the graves that breathe. A Deathworld. Halgest had gravity that would crush most of us into paste. The air was thick with something that would strip a Valen lung in under a minute. The native life on Halgest, and I'm not exaggerating this for effect, it's in the survey records, included 7 distinct species that hunted the human colonists as a food source. Not attacked, hunted, made plans, waited. Humans lived there on purpose for 6 generations. When the recruitment ships first went to Halgest, the story goes, the humans thought it was a trick. They couldn't understand why anyone would come to their miserable rock looking for soldiers. To them, staying alive was just Tuesday. It wasn't heroic. It was chores. So we got Sabine Tor, and we all assumed she'd wash out in the first month. I want to be honest with you about how we thought back then because it matters for the rest of this. We didn't hate humans, it wasn't that. It was more like we pitied them. We looked at their soft skin, their single hearts, their tiny frames, and we felt sorry for them. They didn't have plating. They didn't have venom. They didn't have a second lung or a hardened crest or claws that could open a bulkhead. They just had stubbornness, and we thought stubbornness was cute, a survival trait for creatures who had nothing better. I was so wrong that it still embarrasses me. The first time I actually noticed Sabine, really noticed her, as a person and not a line on a roster, was 3 weeks before the Class 5 drill. It was in the mess hall. Now the mess hall at Threncaskell was a rough place socially. 41 species, all of them proud, all of them raised to believe they were the strongest thing their world ever made, all crammed into one room 3 times a day. You'd think there'd be fights. There weren't much, but there was ranking. Constant, silent ranking. Everyone measuring everyone. The humans, there were only 4 in the whole academy that year, always got the lowest seats. The corner near the recycler vents. Nobody assigned it. It just happened. The way water finds the low ground. And I watched a Draylen cadet, big one, plated across the shoulders, walk past Sabine's table and knock her tray to the floor. On purpose. Slow enough that everyone could see it was on purpose. I braced myself. I'd seen this before. Usually the smaller cadet either fights and loses or shrinks and takes it. Either way it ends the same. The strong stay strong. Sabine looked at her food on the floor. Then she looked up at the Draylen. And she laughed. Not an angry laugh, not a scared one. A real, easy laugh like he'd told a mildly funny joke. She said something to him, I was too far to hear it, and whatever it was, the Draylen cadet's whole posture changed. His plates flattened. His crest went low. He backed off. He actually backed off, and he never bothered her again. I asked her about it later, much later after everything. I asked her what she'd said to him. She shrugged and said, I told him if he wanted to see me on the floor, he was welcome to try, but he should probably eat first. Because he'd need the energy, and afterward he wouldn't have a mouth to do it with. She said it so casually, like she was reading a weather report. That was Sabine. She never raised her voice. She never puffed herself up. She just told you the truth about what would happen in a flat little voice, and something in the animal part of your brain believed her instantly. I filed it away as an oddity, a human trick. I didn't understand yet that it wasn't a trick at all. She just actually meant it. Every time. And creatures like the Draylen, who'd been raised to threaten, had never in their lives met something that simply told the truth about violence with no drama attached to it. Humans, I would learn, don't perform danger. They just are it quietly and let you find out on your own schedule. The days before a Class 5 drill were always tense. The cadets knew it was coming. Not the date, we kept that vague on purpose, but they knew the block was in their path. Word gets around. Older cadets told younger ones. The stories got exaggerated, the way they always do. By the time a cohort reached Class 5, half of them thought they were walking into a chamber that could kill. It couldn't. Sopper 9 had a perfect safety record over 2 centuries, but fear doesn't check the records. I watched the cohort get quiet that week. The loud ones went quiet first, always the way. The Draylen cadet who'd knocked Sabine's tray stopped eating. An Ossic cadet, one of the strongest in the class, developed a tremor in one hand that she couldn't hide. They were the best in the galaxy, and they were. All of them afraid. All of them except one. Sabine trained like nothing was coming. She ran her drills. She ate her food. She slept, apparently, like a rock. The other humans said she was the only one in the human wing who never had the night panics. She wasn't brave about the drill, exactly. Brave implies you've thought about the danger and decided to face it anyway. Sabine just hadn't thought about it, because to her it wasn't dangerous. Gas in a room. On Halgest, that was Tuesday afternoon. The air on her homeworld would have killed everyone in the cohort in seconds. She grew up filtering things through her own body that would have registered as a chemical weapons attack anywhere else in the galaxy. We didn't know that yet. We hadn't done the math. We looked at her calm and thought she was either stupid or in denial. I want to tell you about the morning of the drill now, because I was there. I was in the control booth. I saw the whole thing through the glass, and I've replayed it 10,000 times since, and it still doesn't feel real. Block Theta ran on a Thren morning, blood-colored light, the kind that made everyone look like they were already wounded. We assembled the 62 cadets in the staging corridor outside the chamber. I remember the sound of it, 62 elite soldiers from 41 worlds, and the corridor was dead silent. You could hear the air recyclers. You could hear one cadet's breathing, ragged, near the back. Chief Instructor Vosk gave the briefing. Vosk was older than me by a long way, plated and scarred, a veteran of 2 campaigns before he ever taught a day. He had a voice like a door closing. He told them what I'd heard him tell 100 cohorts, that the chamber ahead would not kill them, that it would take their bodies away one piece at a time, that the only thing they controlled once inside was their mind, that we were not testing their strength. We were testing what was left when strength was gone. Some of you, he said, believe you are strong because your body has never failed you. Today your body will fail you, and we will see, for the first time, who you actually are. He always ended with that line. It landed differently on different faces. The Draylen cadets' plates were rattling. The Ossic with the tremor had it in both hands now. A Vint cadet was breathing so fast I worried he'd hyperventilate before we even started. And Sabine Tor stood in the middle of the formation with her hands loosely clasped behind her back, looking mildly bored, the way you look in a queue that's moving too slow. Vosk saw it, of course he saw it. Vosk saw everything. He walked down the line and stopped in front of her, looked down at her. She came up to about his mid-chest, and he said quietly in that door-closing voice, "You are not afraid, cadet." It wasn't a question. Sabine looked up at him, and she said, "No, sir." "Why not?" She thought about it. Actually thought. You could see her looking for an answer that wouldn't sound rude. And then she gave up on finding one and just told the truth, the way she always did. "Because I've smelled worse, sir." A few cadets nearby heard it. I saw one of them, the Ossic with the tremor, turn and look at Sabine like she'd started speaking a dead language, like the words didn't fit together. Smelled worse. They were about to walk into the most feared chamber in the academy, and this small, soft human was talking about the smell. Vosk studied her for a long moment. I couldn't read his face through the glass. Then he moved on and the briefing ended and the doors opened. 62 cadets filed into Class 5. And the last one in was the human, hands behind her back, and I swear on my ancestors, as she crossed the threshold I saw her wrinkle her nose. Just once, like she'd caught a whiff of something already. The door sealed. Up in the control booth it was me, Vosk, and 2 techs. The booth looked down into the chamber through a long window of reinforced glass. Below us, the 62 cadets stood in their assigned positions, spaced out in a grid facing forward. The protocol was simple. We release Sopper 9 in graduated doses. We start light. We watch. As the dose climbs, cadets begin to go down. We record the order they fall, the way they fall, and most importantly, how they conduct themselves on the way down. Do they fight it clean? Do they panic? Do they try to help each other, which is against protocol but tells us something good about them? Do they crawl for the door, which tells us something we need to know before we ever put them near a real battlefield? The whole thing usually took about 40 minutes from first release to full incapacitation. Vosk gave the order. The tech opened the first valve. You couldn't see the gas. Sopper 9 is invisible, nearly odorless to most species, a faint Swedish note easy to miss. The emitter lines along the ceiling hissed, so quiet you had to know to listen for it. For the first few minutes, nothing. The cadets stood at attention, 62 of them, good posture mostly, a few of the frightened ones swaying slightly. I watched the timer. I watched the dose readout climbing on the panel in front of me. At the 4-minute mark, the first one went. It was a Corin cadet, small crested thing, prone to nerves. I'd flagged him weeks ago as a likely early drop. His knees just folded. He went down soft, no drama, and lay on his side breathing steady. Good, clean drop. I logged it. Then a vent. Then 2 Dralen at almost the same moment. The big plated one among them, down he went. All that armor useless against a chemical that ignored armor entirely. And I remember thinking, there's the bully. And the gas doesn't care how strong you are, does it? After the 8-minute mark, they started going faster. This is normal. Once the dose crosses a threshold, the drops come in waves. I was logging as fast as I could. Down, down, down. The chamber floor was filling with them, the finest soldiers in the galaxy, laid out in rows, conscious, blinking, unable to move, doing exactly what they'd been trained to do, which was endure it with dignity. Most of them were beautiful, honestly. That sounds strange. But there's a real dignity in watching someone lose control of their body and refuse to lose control of themselves. The Ossic with the tremor went down at 12 minutes, and she went down like a soldier, jaw set, eyes forward, not a sound. I was proud of them. This was a good cohort. And then one of the techs said, "Sub-instructor, the human." I looked. Everyone else was on the floor. Not everyone. There were still maybe 15 standing at that point, the strong ones, the last holdouts. But my eye went where the tech pointed, and I found Sabine Tor, and I stopped breathing for a second. Because she wasn't standing at attention anymore. She was moving. Not falling, moving, walking. Slowly, casually, threading between the fallen cadets, stepping carefully over an outstretched Dralen arm, and she was looking up at the ceiling. She was looking at the emitter lines. She'd figured out where the gas was coming from. In the middle of a dose that had already dropped 40+ of the galaxy's best, she'd not only stayed on her feet, she'd gotten curious about the plumbing. Vosk was at the glass now, both hands on the rail. He said one word low, "Increase." The tech looked at him. "Sir, we're already at standard full for." "Increase." The tech opened the valve wider. The dose readout climbed past the normal ceiling. This wasn't unheard of. Occasionally a cadet from a hardy species needed a heavier hand, and Sopper 9 had a wide safety margin. We had room to go up. We went up. Down in the chamber, the last of the holdouts folded. The strong ones. The 2-hearted Vint, the 9-day Ossic, all of them down, down, until the floor of Class 5 was a carpet of 61 bodies. And one girl still on her feet. She'd stopped walking. She was standing under one of the emitter lines now, head tilted back, and I zoomed the booth optic to be sure she had her eyes closed. She looked like someone standing in light rain, almost peaceful. Then she brought one hand up and pinched the bridge of her nose, squeezed it, shook her head like she was trying to clear it. And her mouth moved. We had audio in the chamber. The tech pulled it up. Ambient hiss, 61 cadets breathing on the floor, and then Sabine Tor's voice, small and flat and unmistakably annoyed. "Oh, that is rank." "That's it, that's what she said." "Not help, not I can't move, not what's happening to me." She complained about the smell. "I need you to understand what should have happened, physically. So you understand why the four of us in that booth went completely silent. The dose in that chamber at that point was past the safe ceiling for every species we'd ever trained. It was a dose that would have put a fully grown, undrugged Valen warrior on the floor in under a minute. It was, by that point, genuinely into territory we didn't have good data for because we'd never needed it. Nobody had ever needed it. And it wasn't touching her. SOPR-9 works on a nerve pathway, blocks a specific signal. The theory was simple and had held for 200 years. Every known nervous system in the galaxy used a version of that pathway, and SOPR-9 fit into it like a key into a lock. It always worked. It had always worked. But Halgast's air, we would later learn, was thick with a compound that did almost exactly the same thing as SOPR-9. It hit the same pathway. For 6 generations, every human born on Halgast had grown up breathing a low-grade nerve suppressant as their normal atmosphere. Their bodies had adapted the only way bodies can. They'd rebuilt the pathway, reinforced it, made it so a dose that would drop a galaxy had roughly the effect, on a Halgast human, of a strong and unpleasant odor. We were gassing her with something her lungs had considered, whether since the day she was born. We didn't know any of that in the booth. All we knew was that the numbers said she should be on the floor and she was instead standing there, annoyed, holding her nose, and now she was walking toward the fallen cadets and kneeling down next to the Ossic with the tremor. Vosk said very quietly, "What is she doing?" She was checking on them. That's what she was doing. She went from cadet to cadet and she was checking them. 2 fingers to the neck, humans do that, it's how they find a pulse. She checked the Ossic. She checked the big Dralin. She turned one Quarren cadet from his front onto his side, gently, the way you position someone so they don't choke. She was triaging. In the middle of a nerve gas dose that should have killed her, she was doing field medicine on the 61 soldiers who, 3 weeks ago, wouldn't have shared a table with her. And she was talking to them while she did it. We had the audio. Soft, steady, a running murmur. Hey, you're okay. You're all right. It's just the gas. You're not dying, I promise. You'll be moving again soon." She reached the Dralin, the bully, the one who'd knocked her tray, and she looked at him for a second. Then she rolled him onto his side too, same as the others, no hesitation, and said, "Yeah, you too, big guy. You're fine. Try to breathe slow." He couldn't answer. He was fully conscious, staring at nothing. But I have wondered ever since what it must have been like to be him, to be the strong one, to have knocked her food on the floor to remind her of her place, and then to be lying paralyzed on the ground while the human, the one your body had told you was weak, knelt over you and told you gently that you were going to be all right. Something about that has never left me. In the booth, one of the techs had started to cry. Quietly. Valen cried differently than humans, but the tech was doing it, staring down at the girl in the chamber, and Vosk didn't reprimand her for it, which was its own kind of shock. I found my voice. "Chief, we should extract her, pull her out, vent the chamber, recover the cohort." Vosk didn't answer right away. He was watching Sabine work, and on his old scarred face there was an expression I had never once seen in 11 years. Vosk, who'd fought in 2 campaigns, who'd broken 1,000 cadets, who had a voice like a door closing, Vosk looked afraid. Not of her, I understood that even then. He wasn't afraid of Sabine. He was afraid of what she meant. Because every one of us in that booth had spent our careers believing in a certain order to things. The strong on top, the plated, the venomed, the multi-hearted, and the humans down in the corner by the recycler vents, where the water finds the low ground. We'd built our whole understanding of the galaxy on that order. And now the order was kneeling on the floor of Class 5, and it was checking our pulses and telling us gently that we were going to be all right. Vosk said no. "Sorry. Don't extract her." His hands were still on the rail. "Let the drill run, let her finish." "Finish what, sir?" He didn't answer that, but I think I understand now what he meant. He wanted to see what she'd do, given a room full of the helpless. given absolute power over 61 soldiers who couldn't lift a hand to stop her. He wanted to see what a human did with that. Because that, in the end, is the only test that ever really matters. Not what you do when you're weak. What you do when you're the only strong thing left in the room. She finished checking the last cadet. A vent near the door. Rolled him gently onto his side, 2 fingers to the neck, murmured something we didn't quite catch. Then Sabine Tor stood up. She looked around the chamber. 61 soldiers on the floor, all breathing, all positioned safely, all of them conscious and watching her because their eyes were the only thing they had left to move. And she did the last thing any of us expected. She walked to the center of the room. She turned so that as many of them as possible could see her, and she sat down, cross-legged, on the floor in the middle of them. And she started to talk. Not medical talk anymore. Not "you're okay, you're not dying." Just talk, company. She sat in the center of a room full of the paralyzed, and she kept them company so that not one of them would have to lie there conscious and alone and afraid. "So," she said, to nobody, to everybody. "This is a rough one, huh? I know. Trust me, I've had worse mornings, and I'll tell you about them because we've apparently got some time to kill." And she did. She told them about Halgest, about the graves that breathe. She told them in that flat, easy voice about the 7-legged things on her homeworld that hunted the colonists, and how her grandmother had killed one with a shovel when Sabine was 6, and how the whole family ate it for a week because on Halgest you did not waste a kill that big. She told them about the air. About the way you learned as a child to read the wind, because certain winds carried things that could stop your heart, and you had maybe 4 seconds to get behind a wall. She wasn't bragging. That's the thing. She never once made it sound like she was better than them. She made it sound like an apology almost. Like she was explaining why the gas didn't work on her and hoping they wouldn't hold it against her. "I'm not tougher than you," she said at one point, and I wrote it down word for word because it stopped my heart. "I'm not. You're the best there is, everybody knows that. I just come from a place that already tried to kill me every single day I lived there, and it never managed it, so I guess my body stopped taking these things seriously. That's all it is. It's not strength. It's just, I've had a lot of practice at not dying." 61 soldiers on the floor listening, and I would bet everything I own that not one of them was afraid anymore, because she was there, because she stayed. That was when Vosk finally moved. He turned from the glass. He walked to the booth's comm panel, and he opened a channel into the chamber direct. His voice piped down through the emitters, the same lines that were pumping the gas she was breathing like fresh air. "Cadet Tor." She looked up, found the speaker. "Sir. The drill is concluded. We are venting the chamber. Your cohort will recover in approximately 20 minutes. "Copy that, sir." A pause. And then Vosk, Chief Instructor Vosk, veteran of 2 campaigns, a voice like a door closing, said something into that comm that I have never told anyone until right now. He said, "Why did you stay with them?" The venting had started. You could hear it, the big recyclers pulling the air. Sabine sat in the center of her fallen cohort and thought about the question. And she said, "Because nobody should have to be scared by themselves, sir. That's kind of the whole thing, isn't it? On Halgest, you can't beat the planet. Nobody's strong enough to beat the planet. The only thing you've got is that you don't let each other be scared alone. That's the whole trick. That's the only trick there is." The recyclers hummed. Vosk closed the channel. He stood there with his hand still on the panel, and when he turned around, his face had changed. Something in it had come loose. 11 years I worked under that man, and I never saw him look the way he looked in that moment. He said to me quietly, "We have been teaching them the wrong thing." I said, "Sir." "All of it," he said. "The whole class, everything. We have been teaching them to endure being weak with dignity." He looked back through the glass, down at the girl sitting cross-legged among the fallen. "We never once taught them what to do when they're the only one still standing. because we never believed it would be them. The chamber vented clean. The cadets recovered one by one, the feeling coming back into their bodies in the reverse order it had left. And here is the part I think about most. Not one of them was embarrassed. I expected embarrassment. 61 of the proudest soldiers in the galaxy, waking up on the floor to find that the human they'd looked down on had walked among them untouched. I expected shame. I expected anger. Pride is a fragile thing, and we just shattered all of it at once. But that isn't what happened. The first one to fully recover was the Osik with the tremor. She sat up slow, her hands finally still, and she looked around for Sabine, and when she found her still sitting there in the center, waiting, the Osik didn't say a word. She just reached out and put one hand flat on the floor between them. Palm down. An Osik gesture. It means, roughly, we shared ground. It's the closest thing their species has to calling someone family. And then the big Draylen woke up. The bully. The tray knocker. He came to, and he found himself lying on his side because a human had put him there so he wouldn't choke, and he understood exactly what had happened, and he sat up, and he looked at Sabine for a long, long moment. And then he lowered his crest to the floor, all the way to the floor, in front of everyone. I didn't know Draylen did that. I had to look it up afterward. It's a gesture from their homeworld, ancient, nearly gone now. A warrior lowers their crest to the ground before exactly one kind of person. The one who carried them when they couldn't carry themselves. The thing nobody tells you about a moment that changes everything is how quiet it is afterward. Expect noise, alarms, officers running, something. But when Block Theta recovered and filed out of Class 5 that morning, the loudest sound in the corridor was the shuffle of 62 pairs of feet, and none of them talking, and one Draylen walking slower than the rest because his crest was still low and he hadn't decided yet whether to raise it. I stayed in the booth. Vosk stayed too. The two techs left. And for a long while neither of us said anything because what was there to say? We both watched the same thing through the same glass, and we both understood that some load-bearing wall in our heads had just come down, and you don't chat while the dust is still settling. Finally Vosk said, "Pull the Halguest survey file, all of it. The atmospheric composition, the biology, the colony records, everything the recruiters had and didn't read. You think there's an explanation. I know there's an explanation." He was still looking down at the empty chamber. There's always an explanation. That's not the part that frightens me. The part that frightens me is that the explanation was in a file the whole time, and we filed the girl who came out of it in the corner by the vents. I pulled the file that night. It took me 4 hours to read, and I want to tell you I've read a lot of survey files in my life. Dry things. Numbers mostly. This one read like a horror story someone had been forced to summarize for a committee. Halguest. The graves that breathe. The gravity was the first thing. Nearly double what most of the member species could tolerate for long. The colony records noted, almost in passing, that human children on Halguest learned to walk later than human children anywhere else in the galaxy, because for the first year of their lives, the planet was actively trying to fold them flat against the ground, and they had to get strong enough to fight it before they could stand. Think about that. On Halguest, standing up was an achievement. Just being vertical was a thing you earned. Then the air. And here's where I finally understood what I'd watched. The atmosphere of Halguest carried a native compound. The survey called it a neuroinhibitory particulate, which is a very calm phrase for what it actually did. It hit the same nerve pathway as Sopper 9. The exact same one. 200 years we'd trusted that pathway to be the universal lock, and Halguest's air had been picking that lock every single day, on every single human who lived there, since the first colony ship touched down 6 generations ago. The humans who couldn't handle it died, early. That part's ugly and the file didn't dwell on it. But the ones who lived, the ones whose bodies rebuilt that pathway, generation after generation, thickened it, armored it, made it so a dose that dropped a galaxy registered as whether those humans had children. And their children were a little more resistant. And so on. 6 generations of the graves selecting patiently for exactly one trait. The ability to keep standing when the air itself told you to lie down. By the time Sabine Tor was born, her people weren't tough because they trained to be tough. They were tough the way a stone is hard. It was just what they were made of now. The planet had done the training for them across 2 centuries, one dead ancestor at a time. And then the biology section. The 7 predator species that hunted the colonists. I won't go through all of them. But there was one, the survey called it by its colony nickname, the wall waiter, that would flatten itself against a structure and stay motionless for days, sometimes weeks, waiting for a human to walk past. Days. It would wait days for a single meal. And so the humans learned to check every wall, every corner, every time. 6 generations of children taught before they could talk. Never assume a space is empty. Never walk somewhere without knowing what's waiting. I closed the file and I sat in the dark and I thought about Sabine Tor walking into Class 5 and immediately looking up at the ceiling. At the emitter lines. The first thing she did before the gas even took hold was find out where the danger was coming from. We thought it was curiosity. It wasn't curiosity. It was 6 generations of check the wall. It was so deep in her she didn't even know she was doing it. She'd walked into a sealed room full of strangers and her body had said, the way it always said, the way it had said to her mother and her mother's mother, "Where is it? Where's the thing that wants to hurt you? Find it first." We didn't gas a soldier that morning. We gassed a survivor, and survivors are a different thing entirely. The official report was where it got complicated, because here's the problem. What happened in Class 5 wasn't supposed to be possible, and the Academy did not, as an institution, enjoy things that weren't supposed to be possible. Threnkaskal ran on certainty, 200 years of certainty. The whole place was built on the idea that we knew how the galaxy's soldiers worked, we knew how to break them, and we knew how to build them back. A human girl standing untouched in a lethal sealing dose was not a triumph to that mindset. It was a crack in the foundation. There was a faction, and I'll be honest, it was a big faction that wanted the whole thing quietly reclassified. Equipment malfunction, faulty emitter line in Sabine's grid position, a dozing error, anything. Anything except the truth, which was that a member of the species we'd been keeping in the corner by the vents had walked through our worst and asked us to fix the smell. The malfunction story would have been easy. Sabine would have been quietly moved to a standard track. Block Theta would have been told nothing. 200 years of certainty preserved. And every instructor in that building over the age of 40 wanted exactly that, because they'd built their whole lives on the old order and they were not ready to watch it kneel on a chamber floor and check their pulses. Vosk killed the malfunction story in one sentence. There was a review board. 9 senior officers, all of them plated, all of them old, all of them very invested in the way things had always been. And they laid out the malfunction explanation, and it was clean and it was easy, and every face in the room wanted to accept it. And Vosk, who was the most senior of all of them, who had more standing in that room than anyone alive, stood up and said, 61 of our finest cadets were on the floor. She was on her feet, and she used the time to make sure not one of them died. If we are going to lie about what she did, then we should at least have the decency to be ashamed while we do it. I, for one, am too old to be ashamed, so we will not lie. And that was the end of the malfunction story. They ran the tests after that. Properly this time, they tested Sabine's blood, her tissue, her nerve response. They tested the other 3 humans in the Academy too, and here's a thing that surprised even Vosk. The other 3 weren't from Halgest. They were from softer human worlds, ordinary colonies, places with breathable air and single gravity. And Sopper 9 worked on them just fine. Dropped them like anyone else. It wasn't that humans were immune. It was that Halgest humans were immune. The planet had made them into something its own galaxy didn't have a category for, which raised a question the review board did not enjoy at all. How many other Deathworlds were out there, quietly manufacturing soldiers we'd been keeping in the corner? How many other Sabines? We'd been recruiting from Deathworlds for 2 centuries and washing most of them out early because they didn't have plating or venom or a second heart. We'd been throwing away the strongest thing the galaxy had ever accidentally built because it didn't look strong. It looked soft. It looked like it belonged near the vents. I sat in on the meeting where someone finally said it out loud. A young analyst, brave or foolish, put up a projection and said, "By our own washout data, over the last 200 years, we have rejected an estimated 4,000 Deathworld candidates in early conditioning, on the grounds that they were physically unremarkable." Room was very quiet. 4,000 Sabines, the analyst said. "We sent them home." Nobody answered, because there was no answer. We'd done it. It was done. 4,000 times over for 200 years, we'd looked at the toughest survivors in the galaxy and decided they weren't worth training because they didn't look the part. That's the real horror of the story if you want it, not the gas. The gas was almost mercy compared to that. The real horror is how long you can be wrong about something when being right would cost you your certainty. But I promised you what became of them. Sabine and Block Theta. So let me tell you, the cohort changed. That's the simplest way to say it. You have to understand what a cohort is at a place like Threncaskell. It's 62 individuals from 41 worlds who arrive believing they are each the best thing their species ever produced, and who spend the whole program quietly, exhaustingly ranking one another. Measuring, sorting, the strong on top. It's not cruelty exactly. It's just the water finding the low ground over and over every meal, every drill, every day. After Class 5, the ranking stopped, not because anyone ordered it. You can't order that. It stopped because the entire basis of it had come apart on a chamber floor. Every cadet in that cohort had lain paralyzed and conscious, while the one they'd ranked lowest walked among them and kept them safe and kept them company and told them, in that flat, easy voice, "You're not tougher than me. I've just had more practice at not dying." You can't rank people after that. The whole game stops making sense. The Dralin, the tray knocker, I want to tell you about him, because his arc is the one that stayed with me most. His name was Drath. Big, plated, raised on a warrior world where strength was the only currency that had ever mattered. He'd knocked Sabine's food to the floor to remind her of her place, and 3 weeks later she'd rolled him onto his side so he wouldn't choke on his own paralysis, and told him gently to breathe slow. After that, Drath did something I've never seen a Dralin do. He went to Sabine in the mess hall in front of everyone in the corner by the recycler vents where the humans always sat, and he sat down next to her. On the floor by the vents, a Dralin in the low seats on purpose where everyone could see, and he stayed there for the rest of the program. Every meal. He never explained it and nobody asked him to. But the message was not subtle. And within a week the corner by the vents wasn't the low seats anymore. It was where you sat if you understood what had happened in Class 5. It was, by the end, the most crowded table in the mess. The water had found new ground, Sabine herself. And this is the part that I think matters most. Sabine did not change at all, that's what got me. Everyone around her transformed. The whole institution cracked and reformed around what she'd done. And Sabine went to her drills, ate her food, slept like a rock. When cadets started treating her differently, treating her like something rare and important, she got visibly uncomfortable with it and mostly tried to change the subject. I asked her about that once. Near the end, I asked her why she never seemed to grasp that she'd done something extraordinary, and she gave me the answer that I've carried longer than anything else from that whole year. She said, "Because it wasn't extraordinary where I'm from. Everybody on Halgest could have done what I did. My mom could have. My little brother could have, and he's 12. Staying on your feet, keeping people company when they're scared, that's not a special thing back home. That's just being a decent person on a bad planet." She thought about it. "I think that's the part you all keep missing. You keep looking at me like I'm the special one, but I'm not. I'm just the one who happened to get on the ship. There's a whole world of us back there, and every single one of them is exactly this tough. And most of them are tougher and nobody's ever going to know because Halgest doesn't send many ships." She wasn't being modest. I want to be clear about that. Sabine didn't do modesty. She just told the truth, always flatly, and this was the truth as she saw it. She genuinely did not believe she was exceptional. She believed she was ordinary for where she came from. And that was somehow more staggering than if she'd been proud, because it meant she was telling us that her whole world was full of people like this, and we'd been sending them home for 200 years. Vosk retired at the end of that program. He didn't have to. He could have stayed on another decade. Nobody would have stopped him. But he called me into his office on the last day and told me he was done, and when I asked why, he gave me a strange answer. He said, "I spent 40 years certain I understood strength. I built a whole life on it. And a child from a poisoned rock corrected me in 40 minutes, and she didn't even know she was doing it. She thought she was just complaining about a smell." He looked out his window at the 3 angry suns. A man should know when his work is finished. Mine finished the moment I understood I'd been teaching the wrong thing. I don't have another 40 years to teach the right one, but somebody should. He looked at me when he said that last part. I've thought about that look ever since. Before he left, Vosk did one more thing. He filed a formal recommendation that changed Academy policy, the first real change to Deathworld recruitment in 2 centuries. No more early washout on physical appearance alone. Every Deathworld candidate from that day forward gets the full evaluation. The chemistry, the survival record, the whole picture. Not just whether they look like they belong on top or in the corner by the vents. They named the policy after her. Not officially it has a boring code number. But everyone at Threncaskell calls it the Tor Standard, and if you ask a new instructor what the Tor Standard is, they'll tell you it means. The toughest thing in the room rarely looks the part, so stop deciding with your eyes. Sabine graduated. Top of block Theta, and by then nobody was surprised and nobody thought it was because of the gas. She'd earned it 100 other ways by the end. She went on to a deep frontier posting. The hard kind. The kind you request when you actually want to do the work and not just wear the uniform. Last I heard, she was leading a unit on a colony world at the edge of nothing, a rough posting, a dangerous one, the sort of place that eats officers. The sort of place, I imagine, where you can't beat the planet, where nobody's strong enough to beat the planet, where the only thing you've got is that you don't let each other be scared alone. She'd be good there. She'd be home there in a way. I'm an old instructor now myself. I've watched a lot of cohorts come through Class 5 since that morning. The chamber's still there. We still run the drill, but we changed what we're testing for because of what she showed us. We used to test who kept their dignity while their body failed. That was the whole point. Endure being weak and endure it well. Now at the end of the drill, once the cadets have recovered, we ask them one question, just one. And how they answer it tells us more than the gas ever did. We ask, if you had been the only one left standing, what would you have done with the others? Most of them, the first time, don't understand the question. They talk about tactical advantage, securing the room, completing the objective, the old answers, the answers we used to want, and then we show them the recording, Sabine's recording. We show them a girl sitting cross-legged on a chamber floor among 61 paralyzed soldiers who once wouldn't share her table, keeping them company so none of them had to be scared alone, complaining once about the smell and never once about the burden. And we let them sit with it. I've watched hundreds of young soldiers watch that recording now, from 41 worlds. Plated ones, venomed ones, two-hearted ones, all of them the best their planets ever made. And I have never once seen a cadet make it to the end of that recording with a dry face. Not once. Because somewhere in the watching, every single one of them realizes the same thing I realized in that booth all those years ago. They'd been so busy learning to be strong that nobody had ever taught them to be kind while holding all the power. And those are not the same lesson. They were never the same lesson. We just couldn't tell them apart until a girl from a poisoned world stood in a room full of our fallen best and showed us, without meaning to, that the second one is the only kind of strength that was ever worth a thing.